This is Alex Simon, and you're listening to the World is Wrong podcast.
New York. The French delegation walked out of the United Nations General Assembly last night. The walkout came after the UN decided by a one-vote margin to take up the highly controversial issue of Algerian independence. France bitterly opposed the move. Denver. James Haggerty, White House press secretary, says President Eisenhower had a restful night last night, and his progress after his heart attack continues to be satisfactory without complications. Hollywood. Rising young film star James Dean was killed last night when his sports car collided almost head-on with another car at an intersection near Paso Robles, California. He was 24 years old.
We're here to tell you how the world is wrong. The world is wrong about September 30th, 1955.
Welcome to The World is Wrong, an extremely positive podcast where we celebrate films and film artists the world is wrong about. I am one of your hosts, and my name is Andras Jones.
And I'm the other host, and my name is Brian Connolly.
And together, we are here to say that we are not doing this show together. This is one of the ones that you took off. You had other things to do. More important things to do than watching September 30th, 1955. So I had to bring in a ringer. That ringer, in fact, is Alex Simon, and he's just sort of a all-around creature of Hollywood. He is he was the editor of Venice magazine for many years. He has a podcast called, what is it called again?
The Hollywood Interview Podcast.
Yes, he has a podcast called the Hollywood Interview Podcast and a website full of amazing interviews that he has conducted at the hollywoodinterview.blogspot.com. And why he took the time to talk to someone as unimpressive as me. It's only because he loved this film, Brian. This film, September 30th, 1955. Now, this is a date that has a great deal of meaning for you, right?
I was not around then, no.
But it's still, like, you weren't around for the bombing of Pearl Harbor, but you get that it has import.
Yes, it was the day that Mr. James Dean passed away.
He didn't pass away. He died.
He was killed.
He in a car crash.
Killed in a crash. After only having been in, 3 movies? Like, as a star in 3 movies? So
yeah, and only one had come out.
And he was sort of like, am I right in thinking that he was sort of the first of this sort of wave of Hollywood and Americana deaths that kind of had a profound impact on baby boomers? Like, you have this, and then you kind of get into a Marilyn Monroe, JFK, like you kind of get into all these people that died young.
When did Buddy Holly die?
Oh, that was probably around this time, or maybe a little after. I'm very ignorant on, but like when, him, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper. That's the day the music died.
Yeah, so Buddy Holly would have died 4 years after this. So yeah, James Dean was probably the first baby boomer death tragedy that had this big impact. And if not, let's just say it did. Who else would it be? I mean,
I couldn't think of anyone else. Yeah.
Maybe if Jerry Lewis had died tragically in the late 40s.
Yeah, people would have been bummed about that, but he didn't. Instead, he lived to be an old bastard.
If only James Dean and Buddy Holly could have been so lucky to live to be old bastards. Yes, well, we talk about it a lot. Alex and I share a lot of similar feelings about James Dean. So it was a very fruitful conversation.
This is a really good interview. He is incredibly knowledgeable about film history and people involved in Hollywood and Hollywood from yesteryear. And so it's a very smart conversation. It's sort of like, these are the type of people we like on our show. Like he's a movie person. Like just like past guest Stephen Peros, this is not just a person who works in Hollywood. This is a person who lives and breathes Hollywood lore and just movie fact, trivia, knowledge, just insight. It is a great conversation. I really enjoyed listening to it. And yeah, and you guys get really personal about your experience of sort of like celebrity deaths that affected you in your youth. Yeah, I really like this conversation a lot, and I think everyone should listen to it for sure.
Yeah, and it gave me a great opportunity to dig into the films of James Bridges, which we also end up going to in some depth. And so, yeah, great.
and I bat for Urban Cowboy. I'm gonna plant my flag on Urban Cowboy.
Yeah, wait till the outro. Okay, let's go to a clip now from the film September 30th, 1955, and then we will go to my conversation with Alex Simon.
There might be spoilers. There might be spoilers. There might be spoilers.
Hello. No, this isn't Billie Jean. It's Mel Ballou. Who's this? Oh, hello, Jimmy J. I don't know. She can come to the phone. She can't talk for crying. Billie Jean? Huh? Oh, she knows all about it. Her uncle, who's just as crazy for movies as she is, called up from Bakersfield, woke us up first thing this morning. You know, I never did see that movie. What was it called? Something about Eden? Oh, Well, I've seen a lot of pictures of him, though. Yeah, she must have over 200. He's just as cute as a button. Oh, I know. The phone's been busy. I've been talking to some friends. Oh, okay. All right. Billie Jean!
What?
I got Jimmy J here on the phone. Now, do you or do you not want to talk to him?
Oh, I want to.
Jimmy, we haven't seen you in a long time. You deserted us. Oh, here she is. Okay. Oh, my God, my beans are boiling over.
Hello, Jimmy. Did you hear what happened? Yeah, you were the first one I tried to call when I found out. Only one in this old town.
Don't you talk forever. I'm expecting a call.
What? No, I'm not all right at all. Really, I'm about to fall to pieces. Well, I've just been looking at pictures of him and thinking about him. And I'm trying to contact his spirit. What? Yeah? Oh, yes. Oh, Jimmy, please come and get me.
This is Monitor, and now from Hollywood, a special report on the death of James Dean. Not since
Jimmy
the death
J,
of Rudolph
more
Valentino
news.
is the town.
Charlotte, switch it to NBC. 920 on the dial. There's more news. Here's some napkins.
Quoted a line.
They didn't have Great Bed, honey, so I got you Orange Crush.
That's okay.
Turn it up, will you, Charlotte? Oh, you turn it up, damn it.
Screen, he was an extreme individualist, a nonconformist who believed in acting,
Barbecued beef, extra sauce, coleslaw.
Coleslaw. I had coleslaw.
Barbecued ham.
Jimmy. Tough to understand.
What's your barbecue ham, Jimmy?
Likable, lovable.
I can't tell which one of these is a
However
Coke and which one of
unusual
these is a
Dean may have
regular.
been, no one will argue that his
This one's a
talent
Coke.
was not outstanding. Hollywood will be talking about
Is he
James
alive
Dean
or dead?
and what he was
Breathing.
and what he
Sure.
could have been for a
Here's your
long
Coke,
time
Jimmy.
to come. You are on
Hanley,
the
can you eat and
Monitor
drive at the
Beacon.
same time? Yep. I got to go pick up Billie Jean, Charlotte.
Billie Jean.
Yes, Pat, Billie Jean. Is that all right with you?
It's all right with me if it's all right with Charlotte.
Is it?
Do you have to?
Charlotte, she admired him every bit as much as I did, and you know that.
Jimmy was only a movie star. Why not?
What the hell did you say?
I said he was only a movie star, and it wasn't like he knew him or anything. There's ice everywhere.
What the hell?
Goddamn barbecued ham all over the car. Shit, look at that.
Shoot, I just washed my hair last night.
That's just the kind of thing Jimmy Dean would have done.
I've been wanting to do this film, September 30, 1955, and to have it come out the week of that date since I saw it for the first time just earlier this year. And I've never heard of this film before. and I didn't know anyone else who'd seen it, and my co-host wasn't going to be able to make this show, and so I was like, who can I find to talk to about this film? And I reached out to our mutual friend Stephen Peros and asked if he was familiar with it, and I don't even remember if he said he was, because his immediate response was, I know who you have to talk to about this film, and it's you, Alex Simon. So I'm just so excited to have someone who is even aware of this film, let alone an authority as you are. I just have, obviously, whether you want to call yourself a film scholar or a film nerd, we consider ourselves film nerds over here. You can self-identify however you like. But to find someone who's really knowledgeable about film, who wants to talk about this film, is really exciting to me. Plus, I've already learned a ton from you, because you pointed me in the direction of checking out the work of James Bridges, who's the writer and director of this film, but of a whole bunch of other really exciting films as well. So I'm super excited to have you here to talk about this and film in general. So,
thank you. Well, this movie, actually, I had a long journey in actually seeing it. I initially learned of it when I went on my very first tour of Universal Studios with my parents in early 1978. And for anybody who was alive then and went on that tour, in the big orange tram that they had, the inside of the tram was decorated with lobby cards of all their current releases. And we happened to sit in a seat that had a lobby card from something called 9/30/55. And I looked at it, and it had a picture of John Boy from the Waltons, Richard Thomas. Mm-hmm. And he was wearing this red jacket and sitting on a motorcycle. And I just thought, wow, what a cool image. And one of my parents, I forget which, they were both 50s kids, said, oh, that's the day James Dean died. And I had just learned about James Dean like a month before. I happened to see Rebel Without a Cause on TV. And my parents came home and relieved the babysitter of her duties. And both were transfixed watching the climax with me at Griffith Observatory, because that was like the key movie of their high school years. So I became obsessed with seeing 9/30/55, as it was originally titled. And sadly, it got a very small release. I mean, my guess is it didn't even play wide outside of like New York, LA, and Chicago. I grew up in Phoenix. And I kept looking, this will, take you back to the analog days. I kept looking in the paper every Friday when the movies would change, and there was nowhere to be found. So fast forward to about 1986, my summer job between college semesters was working at a long god record and video store called The Warehouse. And we all had first dibs on all the new videos that came out, and lo and behold, there's 9/30/55, now retitled September 30th, 1955. So I grabbed it, took it home and watched it, and I just thought it was kind of a brilliant, glorious mess. Some of it worked brilliantly, like high art. Other parts of it were like a bad TV movie. I've seen it probably 5 or 6 times since then. I got the Blu-ray when it came out a few months ago. For people that don't know, this is a movie that's just loaded with talent before and behind the camera. You've got James Bridges, the writer-director, who just a few years prior had done The Paper Chase, which was a huge sleeper hit in 1973, and I'm sure what was able to get this pet project of his made. You've got Gordon Willis as the DP, who shot all the Godfather films and who shot all the President's Men and the Parallax View. I mean, arguably the greatest American DP of that era. And then you've got Richard Thomas and Susan Tyrell and Lisa Blount, Tom Hulce, Dennis Quaid, Dennis Christopher, all these young actors, most of whom this was their first picture. Lisa Blount especially was a local girl in Arkansas who I think was 19 when they cast her in this. And, all went on to have great careers. Lisa Blount and her husband Ray McKinnon even won the Academy Award for Best Short in the early 2000s sometimes. So what it does brilliantly, and I think you can say this about all of James Bridges' films, it captures a specific zeitgeist of a time and place. This takes place in rural Arkansas in a small college town where James Bridges actually went to school. It was called Arkansas State Teachers College. It later became the University of Central Arkansas. And basically, I think he's a combination of the Richard Thomas character, whose name is Jimmy J, and probably also the Dennis Christopher character, Eugene, who it's obvious is a closeted gay kid. James Bridges was probably one of the first out directors in Hollywood. He was in a long relationship with a guy named Jack Larson, who most pop culture aficionados would probably know as being the original Jimmy Olsen on the Superman TV series. And he later became a very successful producer and librettist. And they were together for over 30 years, like from the late 50s until Bridges' very untimely death. A lot of this I'm guessing, because I searched on the web and there's just not a lot written about this film. So I kind of have to fill in the blanks on my own based on what I know about the people involved. What else can I say about it? Beautifully shot, obviously, by Gordon Willis. The other thing Bridges did brilliantly was he cast a lot of non-professionals in supporting parts and bit parts. I mean, otherwise known as real people,
right,
from that rural town in central Arkansas. And boy, do they drive this movie home. Mm-hmm. Just with their complete authenticity and the fact that they're not polished actors or polished people. It really puts you there. On the weak side, it opens with about a 3-minute sequence of Richard Thomas just watching the end of East of Eden.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we get this, cut. It would have just needed 20 seconds of him watching the end of East of Eden, and we would have gotten it. Because what you assume when you watch this kind of movie is people who are attracted to this subject matter know who James Dean was. They know East of Eden. They know, what an icon James Dean was for that generation of post-war teenagers. So I thought that was a really odd choice on Bridges' part. And then at the end, Richard Thomas has like this 4-minute monologue that he gives to Lisa Blount. That's like something out of a high school drama class where you just, again, you want to say, oh, Jim, cut. It's like, we get it. We got it, in the first 10 seconds. Less is more sometimes. But then he's also got scenes where less is more, where it's very understated. And the people in the scene are, kind of inarticulate people in their late teens, and it feels really authentic. And then suddenly, Richard Thomas becomes this, this poet in the end. So it's a wildly uneven movie, but so much of it is great that I think movie buffs especially, and history buffs, should absolutely seek it out.
Yeah. I you know what? I think I might like this film even more than you do now. So do you feel like it was just that it was a poorly released film?
That I don't know. Because remember, this came out in early '78, post Star Wars. So the zeitgeist was changing. American Graffiti sort of kicked off this whole nostalgia craze about movies in the 50s or early 1960s that sort of then translated into that genre that became known as redneck noir. You had movies like Macon County Line and Buster and Billy, and a bunch of stuff that Joe Don Baker did. Walking Tall, although that wasn't a period piece, but and then you had, of course, the success of the TV show Happy Days, which was set during that period.
And the Waltons. Richard Thomas.
The Waltons was set during the Depression. Perfect example. So, but the nostalgic craze was really going out by then. Star Wars changed everything, and just completely reset the pendulum. So I think it was a combination of that. My guess is also the execs from Universal saw this and said, there's parts of this that work, but parts of this that don't. And, Jim, we need you to recut this. And my guess is he said no, because it was such a personal project. So they just, they did a quick release in the 4 or 5 major cities in the U.S. and then that was it. it was it probably had a run on early HBO or Showtime, which I think was starting about that point. But one of the great things about home video in the 80s was that it resurrected a lot of these terrific films that didn't get a chance in the theater because, as two Gen Xers, we know that it's like if you missed a movie in the theaters, that was it.
Yeah.
Unless it was a huge hit and it got a re-release. And you could watch it on TV where, of course, they would cut out all the good stuff. But if you grew up in those analog times, it was a very different world, which actually September 30th, 1955 shows in the second sequence when the news of James Dean's death comes out over the college campus. Jimmy J hears something on the radio about a movie star who was killed in a car wreck. And he runs all over campus, seeing if someone has another
dime.
Radio or a newspaper.
He's looking for a dime so he can make the
looking
call.
for a dime to call. Exactly. Finally, he runs to the college radio station where he knows it's time for the news to be read over the teletype, and he has to wait for 3 different teletypes to be read before the guy says, "Movie star James Dean has been killed at age 24 in a 2-car collision in Central California," and it's that cut and dried, and you just see how devastated he is. You also see very clearly, and here's another thing that made this kind of a bold movie. This guy's got issues, Jimmy J. He's unstable. He is not likable necessarily. Watching this again last night, I thought to myself, boy, I'm finding myself kind of relating more to Dennis Quaid. I want to get the hell away from this guy. You know what I mean? Because he's so over the top and emotional about someone that he never knew. And I mean, I can completely see the POV of just these ordinary kids who are like, yeah, I like his movies, but dude, have a beer, move on. You didn't know him. And Thomas goes for it 100%. I mean, he completely just dives into how manic and obsessed this kid is. Mm-hmm. And the other really brave performance is Lisa Blount as his sort of Gal Friday / girlfriend / project, I guess you'd call her, who's even
his muse and his inspiration. Like they're like, yeah, they have this.
They're each other's muse.
Yeah, they have this bond of that they both see something and are inspired from something in James Dean that nobody else gets.
Today, her character especially would probably be considered on the spectrum somewhat. I mean, she is really on a whole nother wavelength from anyone else in that town. Even more so than Richard Thomas. At least Richard Thomas is like a football player and, can hang out with the fraternity guys, and he's got a beautiful girlfriend who's the head cheerleader at the college. So he sort of has one foot in the straight world and one foot in the freak world. Whereas Lisa Blount's character is a full-on freak. If it were 15 years later and it was 1970, she would have been a hippie and she would have been fine. But in that environment, there was no place for her to fit into.
Well, can we back up for a second? Because the Billie Jean character. So we got Jimmy J and Billie Jean, and even before we get to them, to me, like that opening of just staying on that last scene of East of Eden as long as it does, as someone who this film reminds me of how much I was, as a teenager, completely sort of turned on inspirationally by James Dean in ways that were probably weird and obsessive, seemed weird and obsessive. And Gordon Willis, goddamn, what he does just in the opening shots of capturing just that high school football scene right before Jimmy J learns of James Dean's death.
Yeah, but they're college students, remember. They're not high school students. So it's an important distinction because these are people these are young adults as opposed to teenagers. And because they're in college, these are people who are aspiring to something more.
It's
true. You have to figure that these are people who want to get out of that small town, maybe even leave Arkansas. Because especially in the 50s, if you went to college, that was something. Yeah. Especially if you came from that kind of a background. I mean, you were the best and the brightest. Even if you went to a small college like that, it meant you had ambition. And I think that that one reason Jimmy J had such a hard time with this is that he was a young 19.
Yeah.
Whereas, the Dennis Quaid character and maybe even the Tom Hulce character to a certain extent, and also Deborah Benson, who played his very pretty, very sweet cheerleader girlfriend, who was just, she was drawn to what was odd about him, but she was equally baffled by it. They had moved into young adulthood. And I think that what made Jimmy J had that sort of Peter Pan syndrome, whatever that was inside him, also turned out to be what was right about him, because it made him leave town at the end.
Yeah.
And go to Hollywood, which is what James Bridges did. And James Bridges, his talent was discovered immediately. I mean, he's one of those guys that just got so lucky. I mean, he almost started working from the moment he arrived. And if you read about how it happened, it was just through a series of random events that occurred in his life where, he walked into an elevator and met somebody, he was one of those people, obviously, that just, for lack of a better way of putting it, had great karma. Everything just seemed to work for him until he died very young. But I think that I also was, obsessed with James Dean and his movies as I became a teenager, and read all sorts of biographies on him, including the most famous one, which was called The Mutant King.
Yep, I read that one myself. I
forget the author's name. Do you remember?
I do not remember, but why don't we just give him a shout out here? The Mutant King.
Anyway, it was a very well written book, and it was
David Dalton from David Dalton.
Thank you. It wasn't your typical movie star biography. David Dalton seemed like he was very groovy, kind of a hippie. There was a lot of metaphysics in there as well.
Yeah.
And I'd never read a biography that had those elements in it. So it made it that much more interesting that, James Dean he almost portrayed him as being more than human. Like he was some evolved spirit that came here, and, the old saying, the flame that burns twice as bright lasts half as long. And that was sort of his overall thesis in the book about James Dean. Why it was almost like he was predestined to die young, because if he had grown older, like Brando did, and just become like another actor, and then, God forbid, in old age become a caricature of himself, it would have ruined the lore of what he represented in the mid-50s to that whole generation of kids, and then to kids later on, like we were.
Yeah, there is something. I think this film taps into it, is whether or not it's true, the impact of James Dean on people who felt like the outsiders he played had a genuinely mystical impact. If that's maybe, about the time, or if it's about the medium of film, or if it's
but here's what's changed. I'm glad you said outsider, because by the time we were in high school in the 80s, I graduated high school in 1985. I don't know about you. I guess 86. We're about the same age. Yeah. Okay. So we're almost exactly the same age. You could still be an outsider and be cool, because remember there was still punk rock then. There was still an air of mystery that someone could have and be an outsider. There was also, you could be an outsider if you were a nerd, if you were uncool. So let's face it, James Dean was a cool outsider. He was great looking. He was charismatic. I wouldn't say he was always self-assured, but even when he was being awkward, he was still cool. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's one thing that if you were a nerdy kid, which I most certainly was, you thought to yourself, I could be like that and not be a complete conformist, but I could also still be cool. I could look good in that red jacket. I could walk with confidence, and maybe the hot girls would still find me attractive enough to go out with. Whereas nobody aspired to be Anthony Michael Hall and 16 Candles. You know what I mean? and that's what's changed, is that now you've got, Seth Rogen is like cool to kids now. And whereas, Daniel Craig, I don't think is. It's now cool to be kind of a schlubby, awkward, eternal kid. And back then, there was nothing cool about that. Back then, if you were an outsider, there still had to be something cool and attractive about you. And I think that's what James Dean represented, all of those things.
And the other thing that this film, September 30th, 1955, really taps into is this thing about, and it's what makes this film so oddly straight and oddly queer, is it's about this guy who loves James Dean the way a lot of us love James Dean. And he even says, like, and then there's, I love him the way that, he's talking about how Plato loves James Dean's character in Rebel Without a Cause, and he compares it to the way the Dennis Christopher character feels about him and the way he feels about James Dean. And that character, the Richard Thomas character, the Jimmy J character, is not coded as... There are characters in this film who are definitely coded as queer.
Oh, absolutely.
But he is not, and yet he has this comfort and fluidity, which is very James Dean. I don't know. There's something... the way I think about this, it's such a 70s thing. I do feel like there's like, this works the way like the best singer-songwriter material kind of works. Like a whole album holds together. Like there might be pretentious parts, but it's not pretentious if you have bought into the ethos of that singer-songwriter. And his ethos in this is so, now having watched all of his films that he directed, this one is, I think, it might be my favorite. I love China Syndrome now, and we can get into talking about James
China
Bridges.
Syndrome
That's such
incredible.
A masterpiece of a film. But there's something about this in the sense of like, this is so personal and so specific and so well cast and so well shot, and because it's about James Dean, I feel like there's a part where they're on the beach and Richard Thomas basically becomes a hippie. He covers himself in mud, and he makes a mud statue of the Oscar, and they all hold hands, and they're sitting on the beach, and it's like the weird, like, you shouldn't make a movie about James Dean because you can't live up to the feelings that he inspired, and this film does live up to the feelings it inspired, so that scene works, and a lot of this movie feels like that to me.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy with the singer-songwriter. I never thought of that before, but you're spot on. This could have been a Jackson Browne album.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? or a Dylan album, or even something by Seeger or Springsteen when they were young.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point. I think that what most film scholars say about Dean is that he was a 60s kid who happened to be stuck in the 50s. Mm-hmm. I did one of the last interviews with Dennis Hopper about a year and a half before he passed, and we talked a lot about his relationship with James Dean. He always called him Jimmy. And he said that, I asked him straight up, I said, because he was such an experimental personality, as were you, do you think he would have survived the 60s? Or would he have OD'd or, crashed on his Harley as opposed to his, in a Porsche? And he said, oh yeah, he would have survived. He said, my guess is he would have been, over drugs by that point because he had done all that experimenting. Hopper felt that he would have become a filmmaker. He probably would have been the first actor to make that transition into being a really successful filmmaker who had his own signature. He's actually the one who got Dennis Hopper into photography and told him not to crop his photos, to just shoot them in a natural framing. And of course, in addition to his incredible acting chops and skills as a filmmaker, Hopper became a world-renowned photographer. And he credits all that to James Dean's tutelage when they were on the sets of Rebel Without a Cause and Giant.
Yeah, gotta imagine, Hopper, Cassavetes, and Dean.
Yeah. Although I don't know that Cassavetes ever worked with Hopper. I know he never worked with Dean.
I'm just thinking of actor turned directors at that time.
He would have preceded Cassavetes, although I think Cassavetes was a couple years older than Dean. But according to Hopper, Dean already had some, potential directing projects in the works because he was such a hot ticket item. Warner's was willing to give him, a low budget movie to cut his teeth on as a director. So he might have beat Cassavetes. I think Cassavetes did Shadows in '59. That sound about right?
Mm-hmm.
He might have beat him by a year or two. But the message that Hopper tried to get across to me is that he absolutely would have had as unique a voice as somebody like John Cassavetes. And it's just, that much more of a shame that we were denied that he, I remember as a teenager when I realized how young Dean was when he was killed, I thought, 24. Yeah, I guess that's pretty young. Of course, now at age 54, that's a baby.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't even fully formed at 24 looking back. I mean, I was still so wet behind the ears. And if you look at how much James Dean accomplished by the time he reached 24 and how much more he could have evolved as a person, as an artist, probably as an activist, because apparently he had a very strong social conscience. The possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
I think we always lament our heroes in this way who are taken away too young, who seem to have so much greatness inside them. I was just talking with a friend the other day about Bobby Kennedy, who's another one of my heroes and has been since childhood. And, the take that most political scientists...
You like him tragic, don't you?
Well, they never start out being tragic. They're tragic because they start out being just the opposite.
Right.
They start out being, these people who seem to be...
But for guys our age, because you've outed our ages, both James Dean and Bobby Kennedy, we inherited the tragedy. We didn't.
Yes, well put.
Yeah, we didn't get to go on the ride and have our hearts broken in real time.
No, I'll tell you who my first one was in real time, where I reacted like Richard Thomas did in this movie to James Dean.
I know who it's going to be because we sync up here. I bet I know.
John Lennon.
Yep, exactly. We're the same age.
I was in like a coma for 2 weeks after Lennon was killed.
My mom didn't let me stay home from school. She never let me stay home from school. I freaked. I think actually it's great that you're bringing up this memory because I think it's what this film taps into. There is a weird impact. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay.
You got me so because that was a traumatic and powerful moment. But I want to hear your memory of it.
Well, I was brushing my teeth to go to bed. It was 9:30 at night, Monday, December 8th. Monday Night Football had just ended. Although I only watched, I think, the first half. We got a phone call from my uncle who, my mom answered the phone and she said, "Oh my God." And she said, "Okay, hold on." And she gave the phone to me and she said, "It's Don." And said, "Hello." And he said, "Alex, I was just watching the end of Monday Night Football and Howard Cosell came on the air and said that John Lennon had been shot twice in the back and was pronounced dead on arrival at Roosevelt Hospital in New York." And I literally dropped the phone and fell to my knees like somebody had just punched me in the gut.
Yeah.
I had been a Beatles fan for about 2 years. I really discovered the Beatles around 78. I bought the 67 to 70 album, the Blue album.
Mm-hmm.
That was, and I just, to this day, I'm obsessed with the Beatles. I didn't like Lennon as much as I liked McCartney. I found him too angry when I was that age. But that summer of 1980, one of my camp counselors turned me on to Lennon, to Elvis Costello, to The Clash. And I really started not only listening to Lennon's solo stuff, but reading his interviews he'd done with Jan Wenner in Rolling Stone. And by 13, I was a really angry kid. And suddenly Lennon's anger spoke to me. Mm-hmm. And his intellect spoke to me. And I had just bought Double Fantasy the week before he was killed. So it's like this new friend that I made, this guy who understood me, was suddenly taken from me. So I completely, from that standpoint, understand what the Jimmy J character was going through. But the other thing is, I was also 13. So, much, much softer than I was as a 19-year-old college student. But
Luke Skywalker doesn't act like a grown-up either. I mean, we got to give him... We got to give it. They're speaking speaking cinematically. I give you. If he was really in college, like he could just. This guy. I'm watching this thinking this guy could become this director, or he could become Charles Manson. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Because again, the guy is obviously unstable to a certain point. And to
But
be
so
clear,
were you when you got that call and you
yes,
like
but I didn't.
we are
Something
unstable.
I didn't let it. I didn't let it affect my day-to-day life. I kept it hidden because I was already enough of a weirdo in my school as it was. So I wasn't going to let people know because, let's face it, most kids our age weren't into the Beatles. They were, they definitely weren't into any of the solo Beatles. So, I mean, I just kept it to myself. The one thing I did do, I was editor of the junior high paper. I wrote an editorial as a salute to John Lennon. And as a reward, after school, a bunch of my classmates jumped me and beat the shit out of me. Told me I was a quote unquote fag and a pussy and all those things. And I knew it was going to happen, but I just thought, you know what, I have to put this down on record that this is what I'm feeling at this, time and place, because I also felt it was an important moment historically. And, that who knows, maybe someday people would look back in the morgue of the little newspaper room of my junior high and, find this issue of the paper from December 1980. Even then, I had delusions of grandeur. What can I say?
Well, it all is of a piece. It's all like if you don't have delusions of grandeur when you're 12, 13, 14, that's what you're supposed to have. What else are you going to have? Like, are you going to be resigned? I know there's the kids who beat you up, and
let's face it. The ones who didn't have delusions of grandeur at that age, they still live in the same little community where they grew up. They belong to the Lions Club, and more often than not, a lot of them are still asking people, "Would you like fries with that?" for their job. So I'm not sorry I wasn't one of those guys. Don't get me wrong.
No, this is where that Jimmy J character and his obsession with James Dean, it just works on all these levels. And I got to say, Richard Thomas, goddamn, I bet The World Is Wrong. I like Richard Thomas as an adult actor. I've always thought of him as a kind of a wet blanket as a young actor, but it's because I never, like, the Waltons are so antithetical to anything I was ever interested in when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But I'm watching him in this, and my God, he manages to play very understated and also very volatile.
Well, in the late 70s and early 80s, he reinvented himself as a legit actor on Broadway. I think he was in the initial cast of a play called 5th of July, where he played a paraplegic Vietnam vet. He was paralyzed below the waist. And he either won an Obie if it was off Broadway or a Tony if it was on Broadway. I forget which, but he basically switched to being a theater actor from the 1980s onward. He's done a few films and TV things since then, but at least in the theater world, he's regarded as a really fine actor.
And the other incredibly fine actor who the film knows it, because every time she's on, I feel like James Bridges this is just going to be a one-shot, guys. We're not... is Susan Tyrell.
Oh, my God. How brilliant is she?
Yeah, a role that should be really deeply unsympathetic, and she doesn't play it for sympathy. It is a sympathetic role.
She owned every movie she did. It's not easy to steal a movie from Stacy Keach and Jeff Bridges, but she does it in John Huston's Fat City. She absolutely, and I think she was nominated for that. I could be wrong.
Oh yeah, she was. She was definitely nominated.
But the first shot of her in September 30th, when she's standing on the stairway of this crumbling house she lives in, dressed in this sort of 1930s flapper outfit, there's no other way you can really describe it. Right away, you know who this woman was and what her story was. And it's all her. It's all in her body language and the delivery of, she kind of has a little monologue there that she just knocks out of the park, man.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even want to say that it's like a lesson in great acting, because you can't do it. I don't care who you are. If you don't have that particular instrument that she has, you can't do that. And what I love about James Bridges is he knows it. He, like, the film, I don't know what's going on, but when it's time for her scenes, this movie clicks into this ultra cinematic place. Like it really is. Those are not TV. Like the quality is not. None of it really looks like a TV movie. But there's something about that. You can tell that Gordon Willis is leaning into those Elia Kazan 50s films. The film in those scenes in that house, it feels like East of Eden, and it feels like Splendor in the Grass.
Yeah, completely.
And
completely.
You know, and then she's in that world. Like those guys still feel like 70s guys. She feels like she's also from that Elia Kazan world, even though she's as modern as any of them.
Absolutely. And if you know anything about Susan Tyrell as a person, she ended up having a very tragic, troubled life. I think what might have drawn her to that script is, I'm guessing, I think she did come from kind of a rural area, either in the South or maybe Texas originally. Don't quote me on that, but I don't think she was an LA kid.
No.
I think she was the Lisa Blount character as a kid. I think she was just, because if you have seen interviews with her, she was always just a real oddball. Fascinating. Obviously, very bright.
She played my mother in a movie. I acted in a
That's
movie
right.
with her.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Tell me about your, because she said to you straight up when you mentioned Fat City that, oh yeah, directed by John Huston, who raped me, right?
Yeah.
She's.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa. I mean, what were you, 15? How old were you
I was 19. I was 19 years old.
You were Jimmy J's age.
Yeah, and it's crazy. The synchronicities here are kind of amazing because the writer of that film told me that that character was based on James Dean. And so, you know, of course, that totally fucked me up as an actor. But it didn't matter because I had all the fire of youth, and I was working with amazing people like Susan Tyrell. And you can't, like, when Susan Tyrell, when you have a scene where you're screaming at each other, she's my mother and I'm the son. She has this great scene, great line, throwaway line. She says to Matt Frewer she's like, he's your son? She's like, yeah, always threatening to go away, never does. And so we just have this very, fraught trailer park relationship. And my character is set up as the bad guy. And we have one scene where we're just like screaming at each other in the kitchen and in this little house. And she just vibrated at a totally different level. I mean, it was not the quality of this film. She was not working, no offense to the people who worked on Far From Home, but it was not James Bridges and Gordon Willis. But it was still Susan Tyrell. And she was a weirdo. Like, she was definitely like the Billie Jean character. Her house was full of art that she made of all of the, like, every piece of her art had an erection. Like, if it was a dog, it had an erection. If it, everything had dicks on it. And like, they were all fertility. Like, it was like, it wasn't intended to be erotic or gross. It was
the original dick pic collection.
They were fertility symbols. And it was like, and it was like, it was a really, crazy. It's funny because I acted in that film with Anthony Rapp, and Anthony ended up living with her, for a while. And just like, it's one of those things where it's going on in your life.
Maybe Susan was a Mayan priestess in a recent former life.
I hope she got off the wheel this time. She worked hard in this life. She worked really hard. In this film, it's so fun to watch her in this film because you can see her feeling her power and being respected. This is when she's still Academy Award nominated Susan Tyrell.
Right.
And everyone on, like, the DP from Godfather is shooting her and knows it. And she is just, God, it's so, like, she gets second billing in this film, which is kind of weird when you see it. You're like, wait, when have I ever seen Susan Tyrell get second billing in a movie?
Well, aside from Richard Thomas, she was the only one who anybody knew at that point.
Right.
I think Tom Hulce, Dennis Christopher, Lisa Blount, Quaid. I mean, I think it was all of their first pictures. Bridges also, if you look at his track record, just had an incredible eye for talent. I mean, he discovered Lindsay Wagner and Well, he didn't discover Timothy Bottoms, but that was Timothy Bottoms' first adult role after The Last Picture Show in The Paper Chase. And he also made an actor out of John Houseman, who prior to that was a producer.
Yeah.
You know, and Houseman went on to be an actor from that point on.
He wasn't able to pull that trick with Jan Wenner, but we can get to that.
Oh God,
Can
we talk about Perfect for a minute?
Okay, wait. I want to get to that, but let's really quickly want to talk about one thing about the Tom Hulce character, because I feel like he in this film, he's the other real sort of shining light. Like Dennis Christopher's character is good, but he also, like, the film gives him his heartbreak. Like almost also possibly closeted. Yeah. I mean, if you look at that's what I think about Tom Hulce is that he's not closeted. He is a horny guy who is horny for girls and boys. He's always talking, like, everything about him is oral fixations and hot dogs, and it's like his character is actually one of the most interesting to me because he is so honestly that in another movie that character would be played by a woman.
Yeah.
The one who is so like is sort of like I'm free with everything, but I've never really seen that character played by a guy that way, and then to know that he's going to become Mozart, who's very much like that as well. I don't know. There's something watching him in this film. It makes me feel like
when his character in Animal House, Pinto, was the only virgin in the pledge class.
Right.
You know, so he it's interesting because, you know, in September 30th. He tries so hard to be the cool guy. He's got the brand new convertible Chevy Bel Air. He's got the clothes, but he's still an odd looking kind of goofy guy in spite of all that. And, you know, he's never going to be Dennis Quaid, who just has that classic 1950s football hero square jawed look about him. And you know that he's still in disguise. He's still not willing to be completely open about who he actually is. And maybe he doesn't even know yet. But yeah, each one of the characters in this, you're absolutely correct, are very rich. Each one of them has their own individual vignette, which gives them an opportunity to show the audience who these people are. And that's definitely something you didn't see in a lot of mainstream movies after the 70s, sadly. Yeah. Although in James Bridges movies, you did.
Well, this is great. So now let's shift to talking about James Bridges, because when I reached out to you about talking about this movie, I wasn't aware James Bridges was not a name in my brain. I kind of vaguely, I kind of would have known he was a director of some things, but I never really explored his filmography. But 8 films, all worth talking about. We don't have a lot of time, but you wanted to start with Perfect. That's kind of coming in towards the end.
Let's go back to The Paper Chase, if you don't mind. We can touch on The Baby Maker really briefly, if you like. The Paper Chase was my first James Bridges movie, and of course it inspired the TV series that lasted throughout our childhood. It ran for several years in the 70s and then again was rebooted in the 80s on PBS.
Yeah.
And he stayed involved with production the entire time. I remember first seeing The Paper Chase, and I'm the son of 2 academics. So the fact that it was set in the university.
Funny. You and I are we're the same person, Alex. We're the same fucking person. That's crazy.
I was also a child actor like you. I did community theater in Phoenix. But I just remember, I'd never really seen a movie set in my parents' world. And for years, I just assumed that James Bridges was at least an Ivy League grad, if not a Harvard grad, because he seemed to capture that very specific subculture so perfectly. And it wasn't until I, did some research on him years later that I found out, no, he was a country boy from Arkansas. And somehow, who knows, maybe being a gay kid obsessed with movies and theater in this little tiny Arkansas parish made him such a great observer that he was able to just plug in the energy and the zeitgeist of all these foreign locales when he made a film. Also, if you look at Timothy Bottoms in The Paper Chase, he's kind of an awkward, weird outsider. Because I think he come from Indiana or something, or Iowa. He's a country boy in Harvard, and I don't even know if they said where he did his undergraduate before going to law school, but if they didn't specify, you have to assume he didn't start at Princeton, that he went to like Iowa or Iowa State or something, or Indiana University, just, your garden variety state university. And then here he is. Not only does he wind up at Harvard, but he's sleeping with the beautiful daughter of the head of the law school, who he's terrified of, who definitely is a product of, Smith or Radcliffe or that entire world. He excelled at sort of fish out of water stories, James Bridges.
And that's another one. Talk about some great casting.
Oh my God.
Edward Herrmann and Craig T. Nelson and James Naughton. Wait, not Craig.
Blair Brown.
Yeah, Blair Brown showing up early. Yeah.
Oh God, the thinking man's bombshell. I have had a crush on her since I first saw The Paper Chase on TV. And I thought to myself, wow, she looks like a redheaded Jackie Kennedy. I'm in love with her. And of course, 10 years later, she plays Jackie Kennedy in that miniseries with Martin Sheen where he played JFK.
There you go.
And I mean, she went on to have, also an amazing career. And I think that was probably her first movie. Also, God, what was his name? The guy who played Stensland in LA Confidential played one of the guys in their law school group. And he
David Naughton?
No, not David Naughton.
No, not James Naughton.
Or not James Naughton. No. He was in LA Confidential. He played Russell Crowe's partner who gets killed at the beginning of LA Confidential.
Oh, yeah.
And he was really heavy then. And in The Paper Chase, he was very thin, almost looked like a former student athlete. Graham Beckel. And he went on to have a huge career as a character actor as well. But The Paper Chase is one of those movies. It's almost 50 years old now. Boy, it still holds up and feels contemporary. I mean, it's just so good. And we both just watched Bridges' first feature, The Baby Maker, which was produced, EP'd by Robert Wise and his company. For a first feature, that's not a bad pedigree.
Yeah.
And it doesn't completely work. You want to talk about a movie with a lot of unnecessary scenes that just keep going on, but it absolutely felt like it captured that zeitgeist of Southern California in the late 60s.
Plus, it gives us, it's the discovery of Scott Glenn.
Who I didn't recognize in the beginning, because we're used to seeing him so craggy.
Yeah.
And I mean...
Oh, man. Well, I mean, James Bridges gives Scott Glenn probably two of his great beefcake roles in Baby Maker and Urban Cowboy.
Yeah.
Like, it's good. Like, you get to be craggy if you were like that in Hollywood.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And did you know on the set of Urban Cowboy, Scott Glenn set a Guinness World Record by doing 2,000 push-ups in one sitting.
I'm not surprised.
And he's also an incredibly bright, erudite guy. He graduated with honors, I guess, from William and Mary. He was a Marine advisor in the early days of Vietnam. I mean, he's had an amazing life, this guy. But the person who really shone for me, we mentioned Colin Wilcox playing the adoptive mother, but Barbara Hershey.
Oh my God.
God.
Yeah.
I mean, not only was she incredibly beautiful, but I mean, just what a fine actress.
Actually, just to because you referenced something we mentioned before we started recording. Colin Wilcox Paxton is in The Baby Maker. She also plays Richard Thomas's mother in September 30, 1955, in a very long segment in which she's running around in just his tidy whities, which I think
in mud.
Like very brave. Like I feel like that and The Swimmer. I can't think of many other movies where someone is so sort of man out of water, just like... It's
another one of my favorite movies, by the way. I'm a huge fan of the Perrys.
Yeah.
All the movies that Frank and Eleanor Perry did together.
Yeah.
She makes a real impression in just that one scene.
She is also, people will remember her as the character from To Kill a Mockingbird who falsely accuses
Brock Peters.
Yes.
Of being a rapist. Yeah. No, she also had a very long career.
A lot of unsympathetic older women, it seems like. And, it's funny, there's another weird synchronicity here, because when you mentioned, I knew there was a connection. When you mentioned that James Bridges' partner played Jimmy Olsen in the Superman
Jack
series.
Larson. Yeah.
Well, Anne Duran was in the Superman series, and she also played another unsympathetic mother in Rebel Without a Cause as James Dean's mother.
I got one more for you. Phyllis Coates, who had the small part in The Baby Maker as Barbara Hershey's mother, was the first Lois Lane in the Superman TV series.
Whoa, Superman and James Dean. There's a odd. Okay, and it does, and it's we should tie in Shadowlands somehow, but I'm not. That's the one with the Ben Affleck Superman murder.
No, Shadowlands is Anthony Hopkins and Deborah
Sorry,
Winger.
What's the one with Ben Affleck and Adrian Brody?
Hollywoodland.
Okay, I knew there was a land in there. Anyway,
very good film. Also,
coming back to The Baby Maker, I think it is very much of its era. It's a first film, and it's so. So many of the things, it's funny because I feel like The Baby Maker actually connects very much to Perfect. They are different, but maybe the most similar movies. And I feel like they're both not great, but very, very different. I don't know. Like, do you see the connection? Like the way that it's so into its characters that it forgets.
Well, and it also captures the zeitgeist of the era. Perfect came out during the fitness craze, in the mid '80s, which I was a part of. I was tired of being a skinny kid. I joined the local Nautilus, and I kind of transformed myself, and I became pretty obsessive about it. And in my opinion, who nobody talks about in Perfect, who should have gotten an Oscar nomination, who summed up the whole thesis of what that movie was trying to say, was the Lorraine Newman character. Lorraine Newman was so brilliant and so heartbreaking in a straight role.
Yeah.
We only knew her as a comedian from the original cast of SNL. And man, like Susan Tyrell, she played this oddball who wanted so badly to be something she wasn't, and she just killed it. She was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I think Perfect is probably Bridges Nadir as a filmmaker. It's not a good movie, but it's fascinating if you look at it as a time capsule piece. And speaking of time capsule, going back to The Baby Maker real quick, one thing that struck me while watching it last night was the Jeannie Berlin character.
Yeah.
Who's this angry activist. People will remember Jeannie Berlin as the daughter of Elaine May, and she played Charles Grodin's first wife in The Heartbreak Kid, the original Heartbreak Kid. And she was nominated for that part. She was so extraordinary. But her character in The Baby Maker, I thought to myself, my God, she's one of today's wokesters who today would be a keyboard warrior who gets offended about everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, because she was standing there telling Barbara Hershey, they're the enemy. They're the enemy. This is the enemy. This is, I was just thinking to myself, everything old is new again.
Hey, you want to really blow your mind and get some of that academic nostalgia going? Go back and watch Getting Straight.
I love that movie.
That is a film that that speaks to today and some of the stuff you're talking about immensely. It's one of the films we definitely want to do on the show. So
again, one of my favorite filmmakers, unheralded, Richard Rush.
Yeah. Stuntman, right?
Stuntman.
Yeah. So here's the thing about James Bridges as a director. He made 8 films. Mm-hmm. The films of the 70s, all of them are the progression of a truly excellent filmmaker.
Yep.
The Baby Maker, to Paper Chase, to September 30, 1955, to The China Syndrome, which the China Syndrome is, that's my genre. From Parallax View, like anything that has like a dark 70s ending and it speaks to like...
Let's talk about how prescient it was. It came out before 3 Mile Island happened.
Right. So it has this sort of War of the Worlds synchronicity to it. Like they didn't know. What's funny is watching it. It's like this film is mostly like if it isn't for 3 Mile Island, this film is a feminist workplace drama with Jane Fonda trying to succeed in a man's world and be a legitimate journalist, and it's great on that level. It totally works on that level. And then it has this whole other level of, and it goes beyond the assassination, beyond the government conspiracy thing to the, to potential apocalyptic, like real life apocalyptic outcomes. And then you have Jack Lemmon giving probably the last great performance of his middle-aged career. And then he goes on to being old. He has the great old Jack Lemmon stuff. But this is the last where he still feels like that Day of the Tiger kind of Jack Lemmon. Is it Day of the Tiger? Save the Tiger. Save the Tiger.
Yeah.
And I know I going back and watching this movie, I was so blown away by how great it is. But this is my point. At that Oscar party, because they were nominated, someone gave James Bridges cocaine. Because after that, Urban Cowboy, Mike's Murder, Perfect, Bright Lights, Big City, he feels like a 70s songwriter in the 80s. Like there's drum machines and spandex and cocaine and money. It does, like, they're good. They, you know, Lou Reed's 80s records are good, you know, but they're not that thing. And I want to hear what you have to say about these films, because my co-host Brian loves all of the 80s films. I watched them and I was sort of like picking through a meal that I know. Like,
well, let's start with Urban Cowboy, because I just got the Blu-ray about 6 months ago, and I hadn't seen it since 1980. And I popped it on, and I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, which makes it a first cousin to anything in Texas. And buddy, let me tell you, again, he captured that subculture, that world that went from about 1980, I'd say, to about 1982, before the 80s really turned into the 80s and became sort of the preppy Reagan era. But I cannot tell you how many guys I went to high school with who had that black Ford F-150 pickup. It was like a 1975 with the KC lights on top, and it was jacked up, and you had the gun racks in the back. And basically all the guys who were seniors and juniors in my high school when I was a freshman, who were football players especially, they were that John Travolta character. Same Stetson, same Justin boots, same cut Levi's, that Western shirt with the pearl buttons with the pockets. It captured that sort of, to me, that movie is about how we fucked our working class in this country. Right, that was right around the time it was right when Reagan came in, after the gas crisis under Carter. So in Houston, you know, because of the energy crisis, Houston got hit really hard. Then Reagan broke apart all the unions in the 80s, but already that blue collar American, that guy that won World War II for us, the guy who had that union job with a hard hat where you punched the clock, but you know what? He still had a nice house with 2 cars in the driveway, was able to send his kid to college. All that was vanishing. And you saw that in the John Travolta character. He was trying to emulate his own father. And it's like, guess what, buddy? The world's changed. So the only joy he had was riding that mechanical bull and pretending to be a modern 19th century cowboy. And I just, you know, and the real cowboy, the real 19th century guy who also didn't fit was the Scott Glenn character. Let's be honest. If it had been 1880 instead of 1980, that guy would have been riding with the Dalton gang, robbing banks.
Yeah.
And he was the real deal, but there was no place for him in that world. And then, you know, you got Deborah Winger, who's stuck between these two men. So I think it's a great film. I think it captures this one brief moment in our country's history.
Well, you know, our ethos on The World Is Wrong is that the person who enjoys something is de facto more correct than the person who doesn't enjoy it. So I surrender to you on this one. I want this to be good. My take on it is much shorter. It's like, this is exactly Saturday Night Fever, but in a...
I could see that. Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Olympia, Washington, and I knew those, like, I definitely knew some of that, but I don't know. I just, you know, it's just John Travolta. Sometimes John Travolta really works for me, and sometimes John Travolta really doesn't work for me.
I hear you.
That's why this feels like Saturday Night Fever in cowboy boots, and that's why it worked. That's why it was a hit. I mean, I remember it was a phenomenon, and I wasn't into country music, but I had like the Charlie Daniels Band single.
Yeah.
But I think your take on it is much better. And what's interesting is I'm looking at it. So that movie was such a hit that he just decided to break it in two and make a Deborah Winger movie and a John Travolta movie next. Now, Mike's Murder is a film that I don't feel like I watched it once.
Yeah.
I like it, and I also feel like it's a much deeper film than I was able to get on the first level. The one thing I'll say is that watching it, it feels like it is weirdly a film about AIDS, but it never talks about AIDS. But the feeling I get from it is that.
Well, apparently, it's a compromise film, first of all. It was taken away from him and recut.
That makes sense, because it doesn't make sense.
Originally, it was like Memento. It was told in reverse. And I know a couple people who've seen that cut, and they said it's absolutely brilliant. But given that was the time, 1984, when all the MBAs had taken over Hollywood, they said they could see why that period of studio executive would have been scratching their heads over it, because it was like a 60s new wave picture that was set in the cocaine party culture of LA at that time. But again, living in Arizona, we were right next door to California. So at that point in my life, I was visiting LA at least a couple times a year. We had relatives here that we would hang out and stay with. And, at that point, I was also looking at colleges. So I came and looked at SC and UCLA. All I can tell you is that Mike's Murder captured the zeitgeist of what LA was like then, because I was going to college here just a couple years later at USC. And I mean, it was,
yeah,
it just there was just something slimy and hazy about LA then that was very specific, and that movie captured it. And what's interesting is apparently it's based on an actual murder case that happened in the gay community in West Hollywood at the time, where James Bridges knew the people involved. And Paul Winfield, who you'll remember in the movie, was just heartbreaking as sort of an upscale drug dealer, like white collar criminal guy, I guess you'd describe him as, was actually the lover of the guy who was killed in reality.
Paul Winfield, the real Paul Winfield?
Yes, the actor Paul Winfield, who was out. I'm not outing him.
No.
He was very out.
There's another odd synchronicity here. I just got to ask you a question, because since we've shared these weird cultural traumas together. I spoke about it in the very intro episode of the podcast, that one of the first and most visceral cinematic experiences I ever had was watching Paul Winfield's Martin Luther King miniseries.
Oh, that was great.
Without knowing how it ended.
Oh, wow.
So that was the other time, and it was right around the same time. I had a very similar, like that and John Lennon's death are kind of tied together to me. And when when MLK gets killed at the end of that movie, my parents were so freaked out. I just lost my shit. Like I was channeling ancient trauma. It was so weird. Anyway, yeah. So, and seeing Paul Winfield show up ever since then, seeing him show up in anything is one of the
he was such a fine actor.
Cinema.
And you look at the way he and Lance Henriksen played off each other in the first Terminator as the two cops. It's like Lance Henriksen was so intense and Winfield was just so chill. Yeah, nothing fazed him. He just he could take a small part like that and so make it his own. Just a great actor. Great actor.
So I guess I since again we share this kinship, I wonder if you have this experience. When I watch Bright Lights, Big City, I couldn't finish it. It was too close. I lived in that time. Actually, It made me think of. I tried to get my mom to watch Mad Men, and she's like, "I can't. I lived it. I can't."
I can top that. So I read the book before I saw the movie. Obviously, I didn't live in New York. I was a college student in Los Angeles. But not only that, but the movie, much more so than the book, came out when I was a senior in college, because I was in love with this girl my senior year at SC who just toyed with me like a cat with a mouse. I mean, she looked like she walked off the cover of Sports Illustrated. She was so beautiful. What I chose to ignore, though, is how ugly and messed up she was inside. We would later come to know as a classic narcissist. And narcissists live to basically destroy other people. So she played me like a grand piano, just like the Phoebe Cates character did to Michael J. Fox in Bright Lights, Big City. And I remember I went to see it with a bunch of my fraternity brothers right when I realized this girl had been sleeping with somebody else, like for months, right under my nose. And I watched this movie, and suddenly, I'm sitting there with like 11 of my fraternity brothers watching this, and suddenly like tears are just streaming down my face. And I'm like, oh shit, these guys are going to see me cry. I just felt, because guys didn't cry back then in front of other guys.
Because deep down, you're more of a Jimmy J guy. You're a sensitive
it's true.
James Dean
it's true,
guy.
But here's what's cool. They saw me crying. The lights came up and they were like, dude, what's wrong? And I told them. They all like put their arms around me, took me out to a bar, and got me very properly pissed. And it was kind of a nice lesson for me that, something, this whole thing, boys don't cry. Yeah, that's bullshit. It was a very cathartic experience for me. And revisiting Bright Lights, Big City, the movie years later, it captured that 80s zeitgeist where it was all about what was on the surface.
Yep.
And nothing about what was inside you, the individual, or the other person is the individual. And, the 60s kids had a hard time with Vietnam and the sexual revolution and everything else that was going on. I think those of us who were 80s kids are lucky we survived the 80s. The 80s were ruthless.
Oh, yeah.
It was a ruthless, nasty, shallow time. And if you had any sort of a pulse, you were going to come out of there with some pretty major scar tissue.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so
true. And that's what that movie showed. I think that's what that movie showed. And then, when Michael J. Fox meets the Tracy Pollan character, who, of course, he went on to marry in real life, I thought it ended on a very hopeful note to show that, yes, there are actually still some people out there with some humanity alive inside of them. And I think that was his last film as a director. Is that right?
Yeah, that was his last film as a director.
I'm glad that he had something that ended on a hopeful note as his swan song, because I think essentially he was an optimist. I think if you look at all of his films, I think he had faith in the human spirit. And I got to say, going back to September 30th, that final shot of Richard Thomas riding down Main Street out of town, and you see the movie and the person on the marquee of that amazing old theater. That is one of the best last shots of any movie ever made. It gives me chills just talking about it.
Yeah.
It's so perfectly done. It reminded me of like an Edward Hopper painting. Are you an Edward Hopper fan?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It had the same kind of feeling. And you have the tragedy of who is on the marquee and what's coming for her, but then you have the optimism of Jimmy J riding off into the sunset. And if I think I had to choose one movie to sum up James Bridges, it would be that final image, or one image rather, to sum up James Bridges, it would be that final image from that film.
Yeah, yeah. To me, if it weren't for September 30th, 1955 and the China Syndrome, I don't think that James Bridges would be interesting to me. But those two films are so great that it's sort of like the lead up to them. I can feel him feeling himself as an artist and getting there and making these one incredibly personal statement and one incredibly like global statement. And then
let me ask you this about the China Syndrome, if you don't mind me interrupting real quick.
Yeah, please.
I would also argue, and by the way, great film, like not just a great film, but one of the greatest films made in what is arguably the greatest decade of American film, is the China Syndrome.
Yeah.
But it's also his most conventional film. It's also something that if it had fallen into the wrong hands, if somebody like, Janos Schwark, who did Jaws 2, who was a TV director, had directed it, it would have been like a TV movie.
Right.
Easily. But you had someone like James Bridges who had such a subtle touch, who raised it to art.
His feeling for the Wilford Brimley character in that, that gives us the ending of that movie in a way that, like, that ending shouldn't work. That's an ending that people try and do all the time, and it should be fake and it should be hollow. But he sets it up, and that is like I mean, I when Wilford Brimley shows up in that, it's like, oh, I remember this guy.
Yeah.
But I don't remember this guy. This is, as if Wilford Brimley was ever young, but this is like, mid-40s Wilford Brimley, and what he does with that character, the sensitivity that just, it's weird. The whole movie kind of hinges on him.
He was in his mid-40s and he still looked 70. That's the amazing thing about Wilford Brimley. He was younger than we are now when he was in The Thing. And you still figure, you're like, yeah, that guy's like 70, 68, 70. His character is absolutely like the Greek chorus.
Yeah.
And it's done in a way that's not expositional. That's the other masterful touch. In the wrong hands, it would have been like, and I'm a huge fan of Oliver Stone's movies for his first 10 years, but there's always that fucking Oliver Stone scene where it's like, for those of you too stupid to understand what this movie is about, here's what it's about. But no, the way that Bridges did Bridges write China Syndrome also?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
He did, okay. No, so Bridges' words, Brimley's delivery.
And the casting of Brimley, he's like, for this character, I need a face. I need a face that just the way he looks says, I'm thinking, I'm questioning myself. Like he has, his arc in that film is crazy.
But I'll tell you one difference, another big difference about the China Syndrome and all the rest of Bridges' films, there are no weirdos in this movie. Everybody.
No. Michael Douglas is the weirdo in this movie.
Oh, see, I disagree. I see him as an ex-hippie who very much wants to be a successful cameraman and be part of the journalistic establishment, but from the Woodward Bernstein mold,
right.
not from the Huntley Brinkley mold.
Right.
So I see this as a movie about very ordinary people, all of them, really conventional people who just have the rug pulled out from under them. And it's his only movie like that, where you really do not have a disenfranchised outsider among any of them. I mean, is there a more ordinary character in movie history than Jack Lemmon's character in this?
Well, you know what? I think that comes from Jane Fonda. I think that was when I watched this movie now, I realized, because that was the point where Jane Fonda was really taking charge of her, her movie career.
Oh, yeah.
And she was at the height of her powers. And I've talked, in the podcast in the past about Warren Beatty. I've actually said that I feel like Warren Beatty, his career as a filmmaker is the kind of career that James Dean would have had if he had gotten to make films. I don't know, like we don't need stylistically, I don't know, but there's some way of managing to independently subvert the system from the role of the movie star.
I have been trying to interview Warren Beatty for nearly 30 years, and he's just so inaccessible, but I find him endlessly fascinating both as an artist and as a person. Also, it goes without saying, I love his politics, and he got his start volunteering for Bobby Kennedy before he worked with McGovern.
Yeah.
So I think Dean would have been more Cassavetes than Beatty.
Definitely.
I think he would have been probably not unlike what Dennis Hopper became. I mean, Dennis Hopper, if you look at from Easy Rider onward, all the films he directed were really weird about weird people. I don't know if you've ever seen a movie he did called Out of the Blue.
Oh, yeah.
He was still deep into addiction.
Yes.
That is one of the most powerful kick in the balls movies I've ever seen. And I see Dean being somebody who would always have pushed the envelope up to the point where, almost like Pasolini, toward the end of Pasolini's life, he made the most shocking movies, mainstream movies ever made. And he did it to make a very specific point. I don't know if you're a fan of his last film that was released posthumously, Salo.
I don't know.
But it's I think it was released unrated because it was one of those movies where the ratings board looked at it and said there aren't enough X's in the alphabet for this movie. But it's also the most stunning indictment of fascism as a human condition that I think has ever been filmed. And I think Dean would have made movies like that. I think he would have taken a sledgehammer and hit you over the head if he had to make his point. But it would have been done with such artfulness that the scenes of, horrific violence and perversion, and I'm referring now to Salo again, that you see, they're so difficult to watch, but you can't take your eyes off them. And I see Dean as being that kind of an artist, because that's what he brought to his screen acting. I mean, if you look at the stuff he was doing in the mid-50s, it was unprecedented. It's what De Niro, Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, Warren Beatty, all those guys were doing a generation later when it seemed quote unquote contemporary.
Yeah, but that's the difference. That is the difference. It's like, it's one thing to cry in a time where people are sympathetic to crying. It is another thing to cry, to weep openly among people who just don't know how to deal with that. And I think bringing it back, I feel like that's kind of what's there in this movie, this feeling of this movie. And it is about, like, when I was a child, I could cry, and now they're telling me I can't express that anymore. And why the fuck not? And James Dean is saying, no, keep fucking crying. Keep
precisely,
and it still speaks. And I think that's why this film still speaks.
There's one other thing about James Bridges we have to address. Otherwise, we would be completely remiss. He really cut his teeth on Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Oh, yeah.
As a writer. He was discovered by Norman Lloyd, who, God bless him, just died at, 106 or something? Who was Hitchcock's producer then, who also became an actor later on St. Elsewhere. And although he had acted for Hitchcock much earlier in Saboteur, but he eventually just became a producer. But he discovered Bridges, and Bridges wrote something like 15 or 16 episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and then won an Emmy and an Edgar Award in the same year for, what was it called? Let me see here. An Unlocked Window from 1965. It was the most award-winning episode of the series. And his work on Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which was also loaded with talent, of young talent. William Friedkin got his first directing job directing the last episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I mean, it was just, a who's who of young
it's like the
talent.
Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits. They're just chock full of everyone.
But I'll tell you, if you ever have a chance to see this episode in particular called An Unlocked Window, it will still scare the hell out of you. And it's over 50 years old and made for TV.
Wow. An Unlocked Window. And I guess to bookend that, we should also mention that he is the writer of White Hunter, Black Heart.
Terrific film. Along with the actual person the Jeff Fahey character is based on. What's his name? He was married to Deborah Carr, famous writer. Like legendary. He did the adaptation of The Sun Also Rises. Peter Vertel.
Okay.
So it was Peter Vertel and Bridges who wrote White Hunter, Black Heart, which it's such a magnificent movie with one sort of flaw. I wish somebody had told Clint Eastwood, just talk in your normal voice, don't try to imitate John Huston. But it's still a movie I love. And it's a very literate, very intelligent screenplay.
It's funny, when I was describing, I've been talking to some of my film friends about, and as I describe James Bridges and who he is, and like I'm getting into James Bridges and what I really like about him, and then I drop on them at the end, and he wrote White Hunter, Black Heart. They're sort of like, what?
Yeah.
Like this ultimate macho old guy, like one super macho old guy tributing this other super macho old guy, with the quintessential macho old guy being Humphrey Bogart at the center of this whole story. And it's written written by James Bridges, who is like, there's nothing macho about any of his movies, except, I guess, weirdly in this one, like macho in the sense of loving the masculine, I guess. And his sort of loyalty to Scott Glenn and his abs.
Well, of course, to be fair to Mr. Eastwood, what we've learned about Clint later on, as he directed more films, is that in real life, he's not Mr. Macho. He's actually a very sensitive, artistic soul. And according to, I've never interviewed him or spent time with him. I met him briefly once after I spent a day on the set of $1 Million Baby, but I saw him work, and just the way he interacted with his cast and crew, such a gentle soul with a gentle touch. And apparently who Clint Eastwood really is closest to is his character from Bridges in Madison County. He's very quiet inside. He's not macho man at all. And he couldn't have made films like, Unforgiven, $1 Million Baby, some really beautiful, tender movies unless he had that inside of him. So I think he was drawn to the gentler aspects of the story rather than the macho posturing, which of course we see at the end of that movie. It was all posturing.
Yeah.
That great final shot of him as Houston in the director's chair. I mean, again, what a great final shot.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the end of the career of James Bridges, which is a kind of a fitting. I mean, he doesn't have something really embarrassing at the end of his run. He collaborated on. I think White Hunter Black Heart will probably be one of those films that falls right in the middle of, like, when people go through Eastwood's career, that is a film that's going to rise up because it is kind of it's like half Bronco Billy and half, well, Dirty Harry, kind of, in the sense of, like, it is the macho thing, but it's not. It's subverting it. It's this character study, right?
I would like to add, because we keep referring to Bridges dying young, we do need to emphasize how young a filmmaker and writer he was, because when he died, he was only, 57?
57.
When he died in June 1993, he died of intestinal cancer. And what a loss. What a loss. I just, and I mean, one of the great gifts of having Clint Eastwood releasing his latest movie soon at age 91 is that, what a perfect example of an artist whose longevity allowed him to grow and be progressive in his work. Someone like James Dean, and even to a large extent James Bridges, they didn't have the opportunity to do that.
Is there anything you'd like to plug or share? Or
I have my podcast called The Hollywood Interview. It's on all streaming platforms. My website that has over 600 interviews I did from 1996 onward is thehollywoodinterview.com. That's about it, man. Thank you for this. I had a great time.
Radio 8 Ball.
Andras here. When I'm not co-hosting The World is Wrong podcast, I'm hosting and producing the Radio 8 Ball podcast, where we answer questions by picking songs at random, like picking musical tarot cards. We've hosted musical divinations for people like John C. Reilly, Patricia Arquette, Tig Notaro, and Fred Armisen, and hosted over 200 songwriters, providing the randomly chosen answers from Inara George and Dan Byrne to Mose Allison and Alan Toussaint. That's Radio 8 Ball, all one word. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and download our app from the iTunes App Store.
Hey y'all, it's Amy from the Pink Among Men podcast. I know, you are really, really busy with your sourdough starter and your 4th rewatch of The Office. So it's totally cool if you don't have time for an informative, perspective-bending podcast right now. But if you do have a few minutes to spare in your jam-packed schedule, I want to offer Pink Among Men for your consideration. Pink Among Men is a weekly conversation on different perspectives, gender, and marginalization in the creative community. We chat with actors from shows you watch, directors who make movies that you want to watch, and comedians from stand-up shows that you'll probably never watch, but you should. Every Wednesday, they sit down to talk about the tragedy and the triumph that comes with not being a white dude in arts and entertainment. You probably don't have time for it, but maybe subscribe so you can listen when you're a little less busy. Get Pink Among Men on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. We're a proud member of the Paper House Network.
Dear listener, if you are just discovering our podcast, you can find all of our episodes on our website at theworldiswrongpodcast.com. You can also write to us at contact@theworldiswrongpodcast.com or follow us on Instagram at theworldiswrongpodcast. And now, back to the show. Well, okay, Brian, we're back That conversation. It was great talking with Alex. I hope we have him back sometime. That was a lot of not just fun. It was just like kind of crazy connective. Like, oh wow, we're right on the same generational tip. So, but
yeah, a lot of similarities between you and him. It's sort of like a brother from a different mother sort of thing going on here.
Yeah, he actually invited me to meet him in L.A. and smoke cigars with him and Stephen Peros, and I was like, well, first of all, I'm not in L.A. Second of all, I don't really smoke cigars.
You're not supposed to breathe it in. You're supposed to just let it out.
I don't know about still like going.
You're doing it wrong.
Going inside a house with going in a room with and just sharing that much air with people. Seems...
But it's dirty air because it's the cigar smoke. It takes COVID out.
Really,
that's how it works.
Oh, okay.
That's my. I'm a doctor. Listen to me. I know.
I think we can get flagged for medical misinformation if
yeah. Never mind. Never mind anything that
oh, they're out buying cigars, horse cigars.
Yeah, no, that was good. I'm a big fan of the 80s stuff by Bridges. Like, I really love Urban Cowboy. And I think and we've talked about this recently, like, I think that the main complaint I hear from people who don't like Urban Cowboy is that John Travolta is totally not believable as an urban cowboy in the middle of Texas. But I disagree. I think it works for the themes of the movie because I feel this movie's sort of about fake cowboys. Like, they're not riding a real bull. They're riding a mechanical bull. These aren't real cowboys. They're guys that go to a bar and play. It's like, these are like LARPers, basically. These are like cowboy. They're pretending to be cowboys. They're not roping cattle. Like, they're just at a bar. And I think you have someone like John Travolta who he's clearly not a cowboy, but that's why it works for me. Like, and okay, so maybe it's just Saturday Night Fever, but with, like hats. I'm fine with that. I don't care. I also like Staying Alive. You know what? I'm just in it to win it with John Travolta, I guess.
How about Perfect?
I've never seen Perfect. I need to see Perfect. That's a movie that I need to see because I like aerobics. I like Jamie Lee Curtis, Travolta again. I feel like that's Jamie Lee Curtis, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to see that.
Yeah, I was happy that Alex gave some love to Lorraine Newman's performance in Perfect because it's one of those performances that's so real that it is a little bit uncomfortable. And so afterwards I was sort of thinking that I didn't like her performance, but hearing Alex give it the attention it really deserves, it made me go back and give it another look and be like, oh no, this is such a good performance that it just made me feel things that the rest of the movie, whatever, that they ended up being odd notes in the symphony of the film.
And she's not in a lot of movies. Like, that is sort of like all we get, like Lorraine Newman didn't really have a big career after Saturday Night Live. So I'm excited to watch her in that movie because I've always liked her on Saturday Night Live. So all the more reason for me to see that movie. Okay.
All the more reason for you to see this movie, September 30th, 1955. It's pretty good. I like Dennis Quaid. I'm a huge Susan Tyrell fan. I just couldn't line it up before this September 30th. But you know what? Next year, September 30th, I will be able to have seen this movie by then. I'm like watching Christmas movies in March. Like, I'm always behind. Like, it takes me a while to catch up with the zeitgeist. But you at least saw the clips that I cut out for us to post on Instagram.
Yeah.
And isn't it a gorgeous looking film?
Yeah, it feels like the 50s. It's like that kind of movie where it doesn't feel like actors pretending to be in the 50s. Like, it really just feel like it's from like a time capsule from 55. Like, it's not overdone. It doesn't seem like, at least from the clips. And man, Dennis Quaid has such a baby face. This has to be one of his first movies.
Yeah.
He looks really, really young. Like, he doesn't have that square American jaw yet. He's got a little bit of baby fat around that square American jaw.
Well, So let's shift a little bit. First of all, we always tell you, but please give us nice ratings and reviews, especially if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts. It helps people find us. You can find us at The World Is Wrong Podcast. You can send us emails at contact@The World Is Wrong Podcast. You can find our Instagram page at The World Is Wrong Podcast. That's sort of your bailiwick, Brian. You kind of handled the Instagrams. You're slamming and you're gramming left and right. You're
slamming and gramming. And you're the king of Twitter. You're the king of the Twitterverse.
I'm the twit. I am the twit that that you can count on. And so we started a Twitter, and we are now posting stuff there. And I sort of handle that. So if you have issues with anything on Instagram, take them out on Brian. If you have issues with anything we post on Twitter, take it out on me. Don't blame him. I'm the one liking posts from Vincent Gallo or whatever.
I mean, so am I. So I guess we're both guilty of the trouble.
Because we're positive people. We're supportive of filmmakers.
If you send love out, the hope is that the love reaches them, and then they can send love back. That, like, just in the universe, like you can fight hate with love. That, John Lennon, man.
Yeah.
And
and it's not that I'm not worried about that my love is not going to bounce off of like Woody Allen or Vincent Gallo or something and come back. It's more like that my love's going to land over there, and then another person is going to say, "Why are you saying nice things?" Wait, I don't want to make it sound like it's a woman. Why are you saying nice things about this horrible person? Because their movie was good. That's pretty much that's the reason. Because the movie was good. We love movies. And, they're innocent bystanders in the lives of the people who make them.
And I'll try to not to say bad things about people whose movies I don't like. It shouldn't have anything to do with that.
Yes.
It's a weird world.
Of course, you can find Brian also at the Director's Wall podcast, where they're currently going through the filmography of Francis Ford Coppola. And if you're interested in my other podcast, it's Radio 8 Ball, all one word, radio with the number 8, ball, B-A-L-L, where we answer questions by picking songs at random and interpreting them like musical tarot cards. And if you are an app user, you can download the Radio 8 Ball app to your iPhone and ask it questions and listen to podcasts and get randomly chosen songs to the answers to your questions from over 2,000 that have been recorded in the history of Radio 8 Ball.
Wow.
And coming up next week, we're starting the month of Wrongtober.
We did this last year. We're doing it again. We talk about movies that aren't considered horror, but we think are horrific, horrifying, and movies that are horror that maybe aren't so horrific, and it's just how we celebrate the spooky month of Wrongtober. I'm excited. We got quite a lineup. I'm very, very pumped for everyone to listen to these. Like, you can just slam some candy corn, listen to all these episodes every week. The whole damn month. It's thrilling. It's a thrilling experience.
So should we tell them all about? Let's tell them all. Let's tell them all the Wrongtober films.
Yeah, let's get people pumped.
Okay, so we're starting off next week with Wolf, directed by Mike Nichols, starring Jack Nicholson, from 1994. We both love this film, right?
Oh, yeah. I'm very, very into this movie.
Can't get enough of it. We're following that up the week after with another guest co-host, the return of Jen Brown from Genre Graveyard. You'll remember her from our Jennifer's Body episode and from our last Oscars ceremony. And she suggested the Bong Joon-ho film Okja from 2017, which you haven't seen yet. I saw. It's so great. It's currently one of my favorite movies. I loved it that much. And the conversation with Jen was really great. And who knows, we may add some surprise guests to that episode by the time it comes out in the second week of October. Then we get into a different kind of scary. Are you ready, Brian?
Right, I'm ready.
I guess I'll keep saying them because I have the list in front of me. We're going to be doing Don's Plum from 1995. This is
the scariest movie I think we have for the month of October.
It is the somewhat banned film, Don's Plum. It was the first film with Tobey Maguire, and it also had Leonardo DiCaprio and Kevin Connolly and Jeremy Sisto and Jenny Lewis, and just lots of young talent from the mid 90s. And then after it was done being made, Tobey Maguire and Leonardo DiCaprio decided that no one should see this film, and so it's very hard to see in America. And I happen to know some of the creators, so I got an interview with Dale Wheatley, who is one of the producers and one of the writers on this improvised film. And yeah, so there's the horror story about sort of these terrible guys who are in this movie and how they particularly the Leonardo DiCaprio treats everyone poorly. And then there's also the uber horror about what happens when you make a movie that ruins your entire life, which is something we get into with Dale. And then we move on into October with one of your choices, with your choice for the month, Brian.
Yes.
Ravenous. Yes.
Ravenous. A little scene, cannibal, comedy, horror, wonderful film. Yes, I'm really excited for that episode. It's a movie I've been a champion of for years and still haven't been able to convince everyone to watch it. So maybe, hopefully, this will make it a tradition for people finally.
Yeah.
Every October to watch Ravenous.
Directed by Antonia Bird, starring Guy Pearce and
Robert Carlyle.
Yeah.
David Arquette. It's a great movie. It's so good.
Yeah. And then we're extending Wrongtober into Wrongvember. Just because we ended up having too much good stuff. We're going to be putting out an episode about The Believer from 2001, starring Ryan Gosling and directed by Henry Bean. And I will be conducting a conversation with the director himself, Henry Bean, about this film about a Jewish Nazi or a Jewish skinhead in New York, based upon a true story. And I think it was really the first film where Ryan Gosling showed what he's capable of as a movie star. So
very, very, very good. So watch these movies, find these movies, watch these movies before you listen to the episode. These are all very good movies.
Wolf, Okja, Don's Plum, Ravenous, and The Believer. There's your Wrongtober with an extra little dip into Wrongvember. Sorry. And so thanks a lot for listening to the show. I hope you were able to track down September 30th, 1955 and check it out. And I really hope you go and check out all of Alex's work, his interviews, his podcast, wherever he's doing something, whether he's writing or just smoking a cigar, it's going to be a very classy situation. So dig it. And with that said, I guess until next time, it falls to me to give you the existential reality, which is that wherever you are, the world is wrong, and it is probably wrong about you.
Billie Jean here?
Is that you, Jimmy J?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, Billie Jean expecting you?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay, come on in. I want you to meet Mr. Brown. Jimmy J and Billie Jean are just exactly alike. All they do is talk about movies and movie stars. Do you think there's nothing else? They go off to the movies, they come back and act out the movies. Life imitates art around here, let me tell you. And today, this Jimmy Dean, this sweet little thing you just want to hold and cuddle, dying so tragic like that. I thought Billie Jean was gonna follow suit. She sure gave one of her better performances. When her uncle called from Bakersfield, she's standing right here on that phone. She starts gasping for air like she's a fish out of water. I was in the kitchen preparing the hors d'oeuvres for this evening, and I hear this, I said, Billie Jean, what on earth? What on earth? I thought her uncle was dead. So she drops the phone, leaves the receiver dangling, runs up the stairs, gets to the top step, drops, kicks her feet, lays there a minute. I threatened to call a doctor. She gets up, making awful kind of noises, runs into her room, slams the door, won't talk to anybody, lets the phone rings. Where are you going tonight?
I'm going to Charlotte Smith's house for supper.
Charlotte Smith?
Yeah.
I didn't know she knew Charlotte Smith.
Oh, yeah.
The girls' football queen last year.
Yeah, and this year, too. 2 years in a row, some kind of record.
When's homecoming this year?
About 3 weeks, I think.
Isn't that nice? Smith. Isn't he the state senator?
Yeah, that's right. That's the one.
Isn't this nice? Wow. All right, well, now this pleases me to death. You go right up there. Go get her now. Isn't that nice? He's a real fine boy. I always told Billie Jean to run with the best. So what, they imitate the movies? I did, didn't you? Heck, half the time I thought I was Betty Grable.
Remind me more of Jane Russell.
Whoa, Mr. Brown.